Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who makes us holy with mitzvot and commands us to engage in words of Torah. In this week's Torah portion, Tetzaveh, begins by talking about the maintenance of an eternal light in the tabernacle, something which our practice still references, the eternal light over the Torah, over the ark. And then talks about the clothes of the priests and of the high priest, and then the consecration of the priests. And one question which comes out of that is, what difference does it make, the clothes we wear? How do the clothes we wear impact upon us? I brought that question up this week in the prison. The clothes you wear make a big difference there. Whether you're in prison clothes, browns or blues, or officers, or street clothes, it makes a big difference. And the clothes we wear on Purim, how does that impact upon us? Purim is coming. Purim, this Monday night, Tuesday, when many of us will be wearing costumes. And what is the impact upon us of wearing costumes? The impact on our inner life and on our community life. Today is a Shabbat with a special name. It's Shabbat Zachor. Zachor, which means remember. Shabbat Zachor is the Shabbat before Purim every year. Zachor means remember. But the name of the Shabbat actually comes from, it's called Zachor because it is the first word of the special reading for Shabbat Zachor. That special reading for Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat before Purim, speaks to a deep and paradoxical meaning of Purim, which is a day when actually we are not thinking too much. Purim. We're not thinking too much. Purim is observed in a silly and very forgetful way, a way which encourages us not to think about things too much. So we do the thinking ahead of time and afterwards, not on Purim. At the same time, that on a surface level, this reading is a very troubling reading on the surface level, certainly, and paradoxical. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. Baderech b'tzeitchem mimitzrayim. On the road in your coming out from Egypt. Asher karcha baderech. How he smote, Asher karcha baderech vayzanev becha kol hanechashalim acharecha. How he met you by the way and smote the aftermost of you, all that were sick behind you when you were tired and weary, and they did not fear God. V'haya v'haniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha mesaviv. Therefore it shall be when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies round about in the land which the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance to possess it. Timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim. You shall blot out the mention or the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Lo tishkach. You shall not forget. I said paradoxical. I said problematic. You shall blot out the memory of Amalek Don't forget. You shall forget. Don't forget. Again, if you look at a close reading, there is so much paradox here. The section begins with the word zachor, remember. Remember, and it ends with tishkach, forget. Lo tishkach, don't forget. And look at it more closely. Remember what they did. Not so much remember them. Remember what they did. But blot out the memory or mention. That root zecher can mean both memory or mention. Blot out the memory or mention of their being. Don't forget. On close reading, it could mean remember what happened. Remember what they did, but don't remember them. Even don't bother to deal with the people themselves. It could mean drop all plans for revenge. It could mean the opposite of what it sounds like. It sounds genocidal. Wipe out the people. It says wipe out the mention, wipe out the memory. Don't forget. It could mean drop all plans for revenge. But still very much on the surface level, it's troubling. The rabbis of the Talmud were troubled by this. The prophet Samuel insisted that the first king of the tribes of Israel, Saul, actually carry this out. We read about this in the Haftorah. It is the Haftorah for this week. Samuel told Saul to wipe out all of Amalek, everybody and everything. Saul goes and does so, except he spares the animals and the king, King Agag. Samuel is furious that Saul does not kill everybody. Samuel himself then kills the king of Amalek, King Agag, and withdraws his support for King Saul, which is the beginning of the end for Saul. Again, we read this is this week's Haftorah, this week's reading. But the rabbis are uneasy with this, to say the least. And this is just one of many examples of why Jewish life is led by Jewish law, and not a simple or straightforward reading of the Bible or of the Talmud. We don't live by the examples, really, of what is in Tanakh, the Bible, or the Talmud, or of course, certainly not the Talmud. There's so many different contradictory things. It's argumentation. But we don't live by that. We live by law and instruction derived from this, from all of this. What we read is not necessarily what we are supposed to do. There is reason that we have methods. We have what we call halakha, which gets translated as Jewish law, but halakha also means walking. Holech is to walk. Halakha is a walking. It's a way of walking. And it is discerned separately from simply reading texts, literally. Rabbinic teaching is clear that Amalek, for us, is a motif, a metaphor for all the forces in the world that are bent on destroying the Jewish people. Assimilation can be said to be Amalek. Anti-Semitism is Amalek. Nazism is Amalek, but not the German people. There is no single people or nation or ethnic group today that anyone could point to who embodies Amalek. Maybe that's the one positive thing that comes out of that story of Saul and Samuel. There is no people today that could be pointed to as Amalek, just forces. There are people who commit themselves to being agents of Amalek. But it is the memory of Amalek, the memory of those forces trying to destroy us, that we are supposed to blot out, not people or peoples or nations. And this is the basis, this passage is the basis of the mitzvah, the command on Purim, that when we read the book of Esther, whenever the name of Haman is said, what do? We blot out his name with noise and groggers. What's the connection? When Haman is introduced at the beginning of chapter 3 of the book of Esther, he is called Haman ha'Agagi. Haman the Agagite. Agag, that last king of Amalek. So Haman is presented as an Amalekite, or a representative of Amalek, all the forces which are trying to destroy us. So the entire book of Esther is about wiping out the memory of Amalek. So when we drown out the name of Haman, or as in some communities they write Haman's name in chalk on the soles of their shoes and then wipe out his name on the floor. We are literally wiping out mention of Amalek. That is how we can come to see that the book of Esther is far more meaningful when we read it not as a set of historical events. Not as a set of historical events. No historian that I know of has actually been able to comfortably place into any point of Persian history this particular story. It doesn't quite fit anywhere. It's thought perhaps it didn't happen, which is fine, because it's happened so many times over. The story itself, the meaning of the stories, happened so many times over, talking about the fragility and the precarious nature of life and the precarious nature of Jewish life, especially in the diaspora. And when we read it on Purim, dressed in costumes and doing all sorts of silly things, satirical things, we also can see the book of Esther itself is a satire. The book of Esther itself is satirical, with a king who's a buffoon and courtiers who are absolutely insecure of their position, and a prime minister who wants to wipe out all of the Jewish people simply because one man wouldn't bow down to him. And ultimately, a set of events that overturns Haman's plans and makes the entire world fear this powerless people. Yes, even that extreme violence at the end of the book of Esther, when seen as satirical, is a reflection on how a small and historically powerless people is a satirical reflection of this small and historically powerless people coming to be so feared. It raises all sorts of questions. What do you do with those hard, difficult memories of how we have been treated at the hands of others? I've mentioned here before my own grandparents who, having been able to flee Nazi Germany, they and their friends, refugees in the New Jersey, New York area after the war, they created a social club called the Forget and Be Happy Club. I just noticed that the Jewish Museum of Vienna has an exhibit on forgetfulness, although they're also talking about the way that certain European societies have forgotten their involvement. We might think also about how certain aspects of our society have forgotten what happened then and there these days. How do you deal with those hard, difficult memories? One answer from the Torah could be, don't do what they did. The Torah clearly says, do not oppress as you were oppressed. Love the stranger, for you were strangers once or more than once. 2. The German colonel who spoke last month at the January 27th Holocaust commemoration ceremony in Harrisburg said one of the lessons that democratic Germany has learned is resist the beginnings. Don't let the small sparks of hate or authoritarianism have their moment and then grow into flames of oppression backed by power. Resist the beginnings. This is how we respond on the day after Purim. The day before Purim is the fast of Esther. We remember the fighting. We remember the resistance. The day of Purim, we drown out the memory in revelry, costumes, even drunkenness. Purim is the only day of the year when it is considered a mitzvah to get drunk. I've known some people to do it. A mitzvah to get drunk. Simchat Torah is a day when it's permissible to get drunk, but Purim, it's a mitzvah to get drunk. So drunk that we cannot keep straight in our own minds the difference between cursed Haman and blessed Mordechai. The only thing I would say is if you're driving away from your Purim celebration, don't get drunk. Otherwise, l'chaim. This, when we read the book of Esther, which is best understood as satire. The day after Purim, we act. We do not become like our oppressor. We oppose oppression, love the stranger as ourselves, and resist the beginnings. And we continue to realize that dangers are there. And I don't usually like to emphasize negativity on our Shabbat drash as we are entering into a day of Shabbat. But that is the dilemma of Shabbat Zachor and the dilemma of Purim. Two overarching dangers that lie before us, the Jewish people, as just two, I see. One is the danger of anti-Semitism, and another I see, the danger of fundamentalism, literalism. I mention that because both fundamentalists might use and literalists might use the story of Amalek in a wrong way, and anti-Semites accuse us of using the story in a wrong way. They accuse us of genocide, and they've been accusing us of genocide and of having an Amalek version of Judaism before the current accusations of genocide. There's not enough time to go into all of those issues with the nuance that is necessary. But Samuel's insistence to Saul that he literally attack a people is literalism, fundamentalism. Literalist and fundamentalist readings of the Bible are actually rejected by traditional Judaism in favor of application of Jewish teaching through a process of interpretation represented by Jewish law, as I said. Literalist readings of Tanakh, of Bible, distort Judaism. Literalist readings of religious scripture distort Christianity, distort Islam. Literalist and fundamentalist readings lead to Christian nationalism in America and religious nationalism in Israel. They lead to religious nationalist attacks on Palestinian people, villages, fields, and olive groves. And the ultra-fundamentalists, sometimes with the acquiescence of ultra-secularists who turned over to the ultra-fundamentalists any authority to say what Judaism is on the public square. Together, they promote versions of public Judaism which simply eliminate liberal Judaism and liberalism from the public square in Israel. Anti-Semitism and fundamentalism, both are things that we must be cautious of, because anti-Semites and fundamentalists both reference Amalek in their own way. But this reading leaves us looking at paradox. How do you remember to forget? How do you remember to forget? I'll leave you with a little more paradox regarding Purim. The phrase, Yom Kippurim hu Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim hu Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippurim is another way of saying Yom Kippur. You know what Yom Kippur is? Yom Kippurim, who is Yom, a day. Yom is day. Ki is like or as. Like me, kamocha. Who is like you? Yom Kippurim. A day like Purim. Yom Kippurim, hu Yom Kippurim. A day, Yom Kippurim is a day like Purim. How is Yom Kippur like a day like Purim? How is Yom Kippur like Purim? Paradox. One suggestion is both are about the masks we wear. Yom Kippurim, we're supposed to be taking off masks. Purim, we're putting on masks. Which gets back to the question of the clothes we wear. How do the clothes we wear make a difference? And how are we both atoning and reclaiming on Yom Kippur and on Purim? Meanwhile, on Purim, this Purim, remember to forget and forget to remember. Shabbat Shalom.